So monocot embryo. Last class we were talking about embryo development, post fertilization events. Post fertilization events, one of the events is the formation of the embryo. Formation of endosperm is something that we have completed. Whenever we talk about endosperm development, dicot embryo and monocot embryo, and what is the first sentence that we have studied? The initial stages of development of both the dicot and the monocot embryo is almost the same, right? Okay, so we will be writing a note. Just a second. So since we are talking about the development of the embryo, who forms the embryo? Obviously the zygote, right? And zygote is formed because of fertilization. This is something that we know. Zygote is a single cell that will divide into two cells, embryonal and suspensor. Suspensor cell is formed towards the micropylar and sorry, embryo cell is formed towards the collagen end. If you look into the diagram, what is the type of ovule that we are talking about? Is the most common type of ovule, that is what is the type? Anatropous, right? So when we talk about anatropous, this being the micropyle and this being the collagen area. So we understood now which part we are talking about. So this would be the zygote. This is the first cell. Ultimately it will divide into two cells, suspensor cell towards the micropylar end and embryo cell towards the collagen end, right? The embryo cell will again divide and form two cells, the terminal cell and the middle cell. right. So if you are talking about this structure, ultimately we have a single suspensor cell. If you remember, we have talked about a suspensor cell that is being formed during dicot embryo development also. But what is the difference between the two types of development is, in case of dicot, the suspensor is a long row of cells, or it's a collection of cells, but in this case it's a single cell, right? It will act as a basal cell later, and the most important function will be absorption, and later it will degenerate. So what is important is obviously this part, right? Because from the embryo we know what has to develop, the baby plant. So it is the plumal, the radicle, the cotyledon that has to be developed from these two cells, right? So what happens is the terminal cell will divide and form the cotyledon, and in case of monocot, what is the number of cotyledon? Obviously single. So what are the points that you have to know? The single cotyledon of monocot is called as scutellum. What is the shape? It is a shield shaped structure. Later you can also add sentences like it is thin and papery. It's very, very small, especially in case of maize seed, right? We will be discussing that later. And the middle cell will ultimately form the rest part, that is the radicle. And hypocotyle and epicotyle, I think in last class we have discussed about this, right? I think you remember something called as cotyledonary node, right? The portion above the node would be called as epicotyle, and the portion below the node, that would be called as hypocotyle. Epicotyle would be responsible for the formation of the plumal, and the hypocotyle area would be responsible for the formation of radicle. But have you heard the words called as coleoptile and coleorhiza? Right. So in case of monocots, instead of using the word called as plumal and radicle, we will be using the word called as coleoptile and coleorhiza. So these are the two structures that are found only in case of monocots. What it means? It means the same part. I mean, coleoptile means the portion that we are talking about, the plumal, and coleorhiza means it's referring to the radicle. But why is it called as coleoptile? We'll see it in the diagram. But if suppose we are talking about this as the plumal, this plumal would be covered with sheet of cells, right? Once it is covered with sheet of cells, this area would be called as what? Coleorhiza, and this would be called as coleoptile. The difference between monocot and dicot: in case of monocot we have the two terms coleoptile and coleorhiza. In case of dicot we have radicle and plumal, right? As far as sheets of cells are concerned, it is something that's found only in case of monocots, right? Just a rough diagram. Green color is not visible. If you want to draw the diagram properly, what you do is, we have talked about this structure. Suppose this is green in color. Okay, we have three cells: the basal cell, the embryonal cell, or the middle cell, and the suspensor. Suspensor will degenerate. This cell will be forming the radicle. This cell will be forming the cotyledon and the plumal, right? Again, when we are talking about the development of the cotyledon, first it was a single cell. This cell will divide and redivide to form a collection of cells, and out of these collections of cells, few cells will be responsible to form the plumal part, and few cells would be forming the cotyledon part. The cotyledon part, as we have discussed in case of monocot, they will be dividing and redividing and forming a huge mass, and later what they will do is they will bend over the plumal and the radicle, right. So what happens is, from this cell we see, suppose we are talking about this as a basal cell, the colors are not distinct. We see the development of the plumal, we see the development of the radicle. Next we have the cotyledonary node, and from this node this green cell would bend down, right. Let's draw it with this one. So this is the development of the monocot embryo. So one characteristic that we have seen is, when we are talking about the cotyledon part in both dicot and monocot, after growing to a certain period of time, it bends down, right? And this is a suspensor cells. I think it's over. So post fertilization changes are, we have complete discussing about the endosperm and the embryo. What are the structures that are left is the seed and the fruit, and I think I have already said seed in details and fruit in details is something that you all have already done in your morphology chapter in class 11. So we are not going to do that again in details, obviously. So we have a point to write. So we have something called as a epiblast. So the question that is asked is, epiblast is a common feature that is seen in grasses. So example is important. What is epiblast? It talks about that group of cells which is considered as the remains of the second cotyledon, because since if you talk from evolution point of view, it is from the dicots that the monocots has developed. So dicots of embryo, cotyledon কেটা আসলে দুটা, so monocots of cotyledon কেটা হল এটা, so হে আৰু এটা structure কোড হল gradually নাইকিয়া হৈ গল, but in certain cases you can see the remains and the remain is called as epiblast, right? So question that is asked is, epiblast is the remains of the second cotyledon seen in certain grasses. So next likhiba development of a seed, ba okol seed buliye likha. So details already morphology korisa, there is nothing much to write. So endospermic seed and non-endospermic seed, what is the difference? If the endosperm is completely absorbed by the developing embryo, then it is called as non-endospermic. If some of the cells are left behind or it's not completely absorbed, it is called as, if it is absorbed completely, it is called as non-endospermic. If it remains, then it is called as endospermic. So what is important from examination point of view is the examples of these, right? Over. And obviously the words bilako lagibo ha, albuminous or ex-albuminous. Sorry. So heading kora, non-endospermic or ex-albuminous. So whenever we are talking about a seed, seed is a structure from where the baby plant will grow. So for the growth of the baby plant, it requires food. So if it is an endospermic seed, the food would be stored in the endosperm, and from the endosperm the baby plant can take up the nutrients, right? If it is a non-endospermic seed, however, the endosperm being absent, that food code thakibo. The question is endospermic seed or food code thake, endosperm thake. Non-endospermic seed to food lagibo, because from there the baby plant has to grow, right? It will be present in the cotyledons, right? So when we talk about the seed, who forms the seed? Obviously the ovule would be forming the seed or converting itself into a seed. So when we talk about a ovule, we have talked about its covering, that is integuments also. So integuments ultimately convert into seed coat. Certain seeds have two integuments, right, or two seed coats, or kisumanor ki thake single thake, right. And as far as the micropyle is concerned, it facilitates the entry of oxygen and water. I think it's understood, right. Next likha advantage of seed. Advantage of seeds. obviously this part is from both point of view, right? Any point that you did not understand, I think is understood. So it's a good means of dispersion, right? It provides protection, it leads to variation, it forms the basis of agriculture, etc., etc. If this is over, next we have viability of a seed. So what is viability? Is the word understood? Viability or viable seeds means the seeds that could germinate. So talking about seed, these are the information about seed that you have to study. Which structure transforms into a seed, right? It's a pre-fertilization event, a post-fertilization event, parts of a seed, types of a seed, viability of a seed, and the examples, just 2 examples. Right? If this is over, next heading would be fruit. Again, detailed description about fruit in the morphology chapter. Just few points here we will discuss. So whenever we talk about a fruit, again, it is also called as a fertilized ovary. No? Seed to ki boli kom ovule. Next, talking about fruit, we come across words like or types of fruits like true fruit and false fruit. What is a true fruit and what is a false fruit? A fruit that develops only from the ovary would be called as a true fruit. If any other parts together with the ovary forms the fruit, it would be called as a false fruit. And when we talk about false fruit, most of the examples you have studied during morphology, one common example is obviously apple and from the thalamus. Right? What is the thalamus? The seat of a flower is called as thalamus. Classification of fruits in the morphology chapter. I think it's heard. Parthenocarpic fruits, the fruits that develop without fertilization is called as parthenocarpic. What is the most important point? Seedless. So when we talk about fruits, three types of fruits, true, false or parthenocarpic. Parthenocarpic ki hoy? Natural parthenocarpic, induced parthenocarpic also, right? Artificially also we can do by using plant hormones, and which hormone we are talking about is auxin. Not necessarily auxin is the only hormone that induces parthenocarpy. We have gibberellins also, but different depending on plant to plant. So when we talk about sexual reproduction, actually this is the end of the chapter. However, we have another part that is called as apomixis and polyembryony. So heading koriba apomixis and polyembryony, but the name of the chapter was key, sexual reproduction, right? So sexual reproduction boli kole all the things that we have studied, right? We talk about the female part, the male part of a flower, right? How does it develop? After development, what happens? Formation of the gametes, fusion of the gametes, fertilization, pollination, right? And post-fertilization events. The next part of the lesson talks about something called as apomixis. Heading koriba ekhini hol ni? Okay, so talking about these two terms, let's talk about polyembryony first. We'll be writing a note, but let's see whether we understood the meaning or not. Polyembryony means what? Formation of more than one embryo, right? Generally, when we talk about sexual reproduction, we see the formation of a single zygote. The single zygote converts itself into a single embryo. But polyembryony is a feature seen in certain higher plants. It is not only in angiosperms that we see this, it is also observed in gymnosperms also. That part of the information we have studied in plant kingdom, right? Plant kingdom or notes saba, that is my polyembryony in gymnosperms, we have discussed that, right? In angiosperms also we see this feature, and as the name suggests, polyembryony, that means ki bahut embryos. So we have to talk about etal plant or bahut embryos keneke hol hobo ketia jetia bahut zygote form koribo, that might be a condition. Another condition could be eta embryo form korise, that embryo might go for splitting and each and every smaller part could act as an embryo. That could be a second condition. Third condition could be zygote form kora nai, some other parts of the flower or some other parts might have converted or started behaving like an embryo. Started behaving like an embryo mane ki, whenever we talk about embryo, specifically we are talking about its ploidy. So any cell that would start behaving as twice-n and then divide and redivide to form a group of cells, and from there the radicle and the plumule will develop, is something that we use the sentence that it starts behaving like an embryo. It could be the integuments, it could be sporophytic tissues, etc., etc. Right? That's a little somewhat we understood this word. Whenever we talk about apomixis, now what is apomixis? The first sentence, it is a type of asexual reproduction, right? Second sentence, it's a type of asexual reproduction but seeds are formed. Right? Normally seed ketia form koribo jeta sexual reproduction hobo, he karone ki hoy sexual reproduction and gametes lagibo, zygote form koribo, tar pisothe seed hobo, right? So apomixis is a type of asexual reproduction that mimics sexual reproduction. Sexual reproduction or nisina dekhat, kyo nisina dekhat, karon seed formation hoy, right? That's the first type. Second is apomixis ki hoy, a type of asexual reproduction. So apomixis or true ray junbilak offsprings produce koribo, each and every offspring would look the same. Sexual reproduction or offspring, or asexual reproduction or offspring, what is the difference? Sexual reproduction or karne junbilak offsprings hoy, obviously variations dekha pao karon crossing over hoi jay no, kintu asexual reproduction hoy jodi each and every offspring would look the same. I think you understand the meaning of clone, right? So clones, so offspring same, so clone formation is a characteristic of apomixis. First ki kolu, it's a type of asexual reproduction. Second, asexual reproduction hoy kintu seed form kore. Third, clones form kore, right? Fourth, it is considered as the most advanced type that is seen in advanced plant. Obviously we are talking about monocots, right? And what could be the advantage of apomixis? We see certain changes in plants. No? Plants will have to evolve, every organism is evolving, right? Plants will have to gradually they are switching for apomixis form, and even scientists are trying to convert plants into apomixis type of reproduction. What could be the advantage? Sexual reproduction on key hoy, the gamete dependent, no? Gamete dependent, pollination dependent, etc. etc. So it requires a longer time. So in case of apomixis, plant dale jodi nije sob koribo pare, there is no point of waiting for a male gamete, right? So that feature is considered to be advantageous and plus evolved and modern, right? It is apomixis of key hoy, will write the point. So what is apomixis? Is a type of asexual reproduction, and whenever we talk about asexual reproduction, obviously we understand we are talking about a single parent, right? Genetically same parent, single parent, etc. Hekarne ki hoy offspring so eke hoy attack ami ki boli kom clone, right? We come across another word that is called as gamete. What is gamete? Each member of a clone is called as gamete. Jiman bilak offspring produce koribo individually tak ki boli kobo gamete boli kobo, as a whole ki boli kobo clone boli kobo, right? And advantage, what is the advantage? Requires lesser time, right? Gametor কাৰণে ৰৈ থাকিব নালাগে, ফৰ্ম কৰিব, ফিউশন হ'ব, ফিউশন নহ'বও পাৰে, পলিনেশ্যন প্ৰপাৰকৈ নহ'বও পাৰে, আৰু it is said to be something like sexual reproduction, or it mimics sexual reproduction কিহৰ কাৰণে? কাৰণ ইয়াতে formation and fusion of gametes নহয়, কিন্তু seed formation হয়, right? This is something important. Apomixis is commonly seen in grasses. Obviously, advanced character, advanced monocots are dekha pabo, or monocots are best example or best family, or the most advanced family of monocot ki hoy? Poaceae. Poaceae of Gramineae grasses. Over no gutekini. Continue koriba. Apomixis, it is of two types. So it is of two types, vegetative propagation and agamospermy. Jihetu ami ki koi aso asexual reproduction koiso no. So vegetative propagation mane ki reproduction, right? So vegetative parts or pora jodi reproduce kore tetale obviously offspring to same as the parent hobo, right? So vegetative propagation is a means of asexual reproduction, and whenever we talk about that process, it could be natural or it could be artificial also. Artificially or means of artificial methods of vegetative propagation could be certain methods like cutting, layering, grafting, etc. This part has been omitted aru hekarne ami poribo nalage. Reproduction in organisms boli eta chapter asile, he chapter to see hetu nalage, so we are not going to study this. As far as root, stems, leaf, rootor pora ki hol, rootor buds thakibo pare, stem buds thakibo pare, leaf or buds thakibo. I think you have heard the example of bryophyllum, right? So a leaf giving rise to another plant, right? So that would be a means of vegetative propagation. So this is something that you have to study during morphology, and this is something that has been omitted. So we are not going to do details over here. What we are going to do is agamospermy. So agamospermy likhi pelai likha. So apomixis type, one type of apomixis is agamospermy. Agamospermy ki hoy is a type of apomixis jo seeds produce hoy. Jehetu etu apomixis e hoy, so the definition would obviously be the same, right? Agamospermy definition ki, apomixer definition si, asexual type. Next is seed formation hoy aru gamete formation ba embryo development without gametes, right? So jedi gametor through embryo no hoy tetele embryo to kor pra develop kore. So to study that part, next heading likha types of agamospermy. Types of agamospermy. Okay, types of agamospermy আমি কি পঢ়িম এতিয়ালৈকে কি পঢ়িছো যে ইন কেস অফ এপোমিক্সিস হক বা agamospermy একেটাই বস্তু তাত কি হয় তোমাৰ সিডটো ফৰ্ম কৰিব কিন্তু সিডটো কোনে ফৰ্ম নকৰে জাইগোটে ফৰ্ম নকৰে বা সিডটো এমব্রায়ো জাইগোটটো বাৰু আগৰ স্টেজ জাইগোটে কি ফৰ্ম কৰে এমব্রায়ো কি ফৰ্ম কৰে সিড ফৰ্ম কৰে সো ইয়াতে কি হ'ব সিড ফৰ্ম নকৰে কাৰণ এমব্রায়ো ফৰ্ম নকৰে ৰাইট বা এমব্রায়োটো কোনে চোৱা দুটা পইণ্ট ফাৰ্ষ্ট ইজ ইয়াতে কি কৈছো seed form ক'ত হ'ব তোমাৰ sexual reproduction তো হ'ব আৰু apomixis of seed হ'ব right seed সদায়টো embryo পৰাই form কৰিব লাগিব right so in case of this also if seed is formed কোনে form কৰিব embryo form কৰিব in this case also if seed is formed embryo form কৰিব in this case sexual reproduction embryo to কোনে form কৰিব জাইগোটে কি লাগিব gametes in this form zygote ase niki gametes to nai to zygote to nai so the point is embryo kune form koribo who will form the embryo based on that we have types of agamospermy is the point clear so seed form koribo libo seed form koribo lagile embryo form koribo le embryo mane ki twice in cell so kunuba eta parent or cell e twice in hisabe behave kori pele ultimately collection of cells kore tarpor radical tubule ulai right So our question to ki je jodi gametes fission of embryo form kora nai ba zygote form kora nai te embryo to kune form korise কি points important মই লিখা এলি প্ৰথমে এখন লিখা মাৰ্ক কৰি দিম So we are talking about apomixis where the seed is formed, right, or the embryo is formed, but the embryo is not formed because of fusion of gametes. যদি gamete fusion karone form nokore tele embryo to kune form kore. Based on that we have 4 types of agamospermy. Is the point clear? Out of these 4 types, no, maximum, I mean this tree I don't think it's very important. What is important is this part, right? So in this case we have a word called as advantative embryonies. Person, this word, what is important? These 2 words. What is important? This one. Another word that is important is advantative embryony is also called as sporophytic budding. A word to important. Baki rest or pra iman question aha nai. Apogamy. Okay. A word to one important. Here is so important. Examples, everything. So when you see the formation of embryo from the sporophytic cells like nucellus, integuments, etc. By now we have an idea about what is nucellus and what is integuments, right? Nucellus ki integuments anu covering. Nucellus ki asile june ovule to form kore, no, a collection of cells, right? So jedi embryo to, so embryo ploidy kiman twice in, right? Kune form kore, gametes se form kore, no, gametes of ploidy kiman n into n twice n form koribo, he ultimately ki form koribo embryo ploidy kiman twice n, right? Kintu ihote ki korise, any cell of the nucellus or the integument has started behaving like a embryo. Embryo jodi hobo lage tetale twice n hobo laibo. Jodi nucellus hoy, nucellus of ploidy kiman twice n to asile, integuments of ploidy kiman twice n asile, right? So embryo to cobra form korise, either it could be said that it is formed from a sporophytic cell, and whenever we talk about sporophytic cell we are talking about this 2 only. So question कहने क्या है, embryo formed from the nucellus is called as, or in advantative embryony the embryo is formed from. So what on next question could be, what is sporophytic budding? New embryo formed from the nucellus and the or the integuments is called as sporophytic budding. So GA question nahe etur pra ekita words or uporte ghuri thakibo, right? Tar bidot advantative embryony word to iman besi important noy, kintu sporophytic budding to birat important. As you start doing your MCQs you will have an idea as to what is the type of question that is asked from this part, right? So what is the word that is important? Whenever you hear about this word sporophytic budding, you have to remember nucellus and integuments, right? And obviously examples. Aro all of this ami jeta polyembryony kori, we will see that polyembryony, one reason for polyembryony is sporophytic budding. If I say that word, so sporophytic budding boli kole tumi egita example monot rakhiba aru egita word monot rakhiba. Is the point clear? Baki etu aru etu important nohoy, kintu eta word ase apogamy, right? So embryo from gametophyte, embryo ploidy kiman twice said, tar mane sporophyte from the gametophyte, the process is called as apogamy. Is the point clear? So we have 2 words, apospory or apogamy. Sporophyte from the gametophyte, gametophyte from the sporophyte. Is the point clear? অলপ আগতে কি পালো, apogamy, এটা কি লিখিছো, apospory. ये टर्म में लिखा Okay, apose pori apogamic hole. It as I said, no, etu part of our key word important, etu word important, aru key important, eduta. And a question I say, nucellar embryo. So we understood the embryo is formed from the nucellus, right? So nucellar embryo develops from which process could you say? Aru the optional key take sporophytic badminton. So this is all about apomixis. Next likha polyembryonic. Polyembryonic opcommon. What is the time? Next class ke 6:30, no? As you said, we have 5 minutes left. So out of this point, what is polyembryony? Definition we understood. Important is it is discovered by, second it is important, discovered in. Next, examples are important, right? Onion, groundnut, mango, citrus, etc. Right? Citrus seedor eta ki likhise josun kiman embryos ase bahut kintu eta word paisu no. So whenever we talk about this, we remember what? Sporophytic budding, right? So a polyembryony could result from sporophytic budding also. The most common is sporophytic budding. Aru what could be the reason? Je bahut embryo ketia thakibo, jeta bahut egg thakibo, right? So this could be the reason. Right? So it could be simple. If there are more than one egg, it will have more than one zygote hobo, more than one zygote hole, more than one embryo hobo. Or it could be because of sporophytic budding. Tat kole ki hobo. So cells from this and this starts behaving like an embryo. Example ki hobo. Hey, ek kita example hai. Citrus, mango, opuntia, etc. So this is all about polyembryony. So ultimately we have completed the chapter. In the next class, I am MCQs going.